Being a full-time content creator is awesome, but budgeting? That has been a bit of a challenge over the years, especially with my autistic brain. In this video, we're going to look at how I actually manage my money without spiraling into overwhelm, even when my income is completely all over the place. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn your notifications on, and don't forget to leave a nice big thumbs up on the video to let me know you want to see more stuff just like this. But let's kick things off by talking about why budgeting traditionally has always been quite difficult for me, even 10 years into being a content creator. And a lot of it does come down to just how irregular my income is. Now, don't get me wrong, I am paid very well. I've talked multiple times before that I do earn more than I earned back when I had a real job. That's why I chose to do this instead. And doing this as a job has allowed us to do a whole load of things we never would have been able to do if I'd have stayed in a normal job. But that being said, there are days where I do miss having payday. I do miss having the same amount of money coming in every month, knowing how much it's going to be. It never changes apart from when it goes up because I've had a pay rise, but it's never going to be lower than expected. It's always consistent. It always comes in on the same day and you can plan for it. The closest I've got to that, I guess, is my YouTube ad revenue, which arrives each month somewhere between the 20th and the 30th and varies massively. But there's no set day and there's certainly no set amount. Sometimes, like during the launch of a new Football Manager game, I'll get the equivalent of 3 or 4 times my old monthly salary just as that YouTube ad revenue payment. Other times, like the middle of summer when the game hasn't been out for 18 months, it'll be a lot less than I used to earn. But it's not my only income. I also earn money from sponsorships, from TikTok, from Twitch, from Patreon, merch sales. There's lots of different income sources, but none of them pay on a regular set schedule, a regular set amount. And it can be quite hard to keep track of, especially when you do occasionally get the odd brand or the odd company that might take months upon months to pay you after you've actually done the work for them. And because of my autism, because of my executive dysfunction, I'm also an absolute nightmare for keeping track of that stuff. I'm not great at keeping track of my bank balance, knowing how much is supposed to be in there, knowing what bills I'm supposed to have coming out, knowing what money's supposed to be coming in. I'm terrible at tracking and managing receipts and all that kind of stuff. It all piles up on top of me and I don't do it often enough and I don't do it in enough detail, and I've always been that way. I get laughed at on our podcast from time to time because if there's a gaming subscription that exists, I probably have it, even though I might not have used it for years. In fact, me and Anna have gone through that together over the last few months and cancelled stuff like Xbox Game Pass and whatever the PlayStation equivalent is and whatever the EA equivalent is. And I think I had 3 different versions of the EA one. And I don't really keep track of that kind of stuff. I've always kind of worked on the basis of as long as there's enough money in my account for what I need for the immediate now, I don't really worry about how we got to that point. And because of that, there has been a lot of wasted money over the years. Throw that into my tendency to hyper-focus and dopamine chase and get super duper obsessed with a particular topic or hobby or thing, which I will then throw loads of money at. And you can see how erratic, kind of uncontrolled spending thrown in with an erratic, very variable, inconsistent income can lead to budgeting problems. And that's speaking even as a qualified financial advisor, qualified mortgage advisor who can do the big picture stuff absolutely fine. Ironically, we're fine for like pensions, investments, all the big picture stuff. It's literally the day-to-day spending current account stuff that has always been my downfall. But that's not to say I've just accepted I'm bad at that kind of thing and I'm like, oh, well, haha, lol, I guess I'm bad at that kind of thing. I have developed systems over the years to try and get that stuff under control. It's still a long way from perfect, but as with most things in my life, I'm not searching for perfect. I'm searching for something that works. And what we've got now does kind of work. And it's kind of built on a really important principle of knowing what my monthly baseline expenses are, knowing what my actual monthly spend is. So I'm talking things like rent, utilities, food, the storage unit, subscriptions, my car, the stuff that is going to be the same every month, isn't going to vary, and knowing how much money I need for those things and when I need that money. And there have been plenty of times over my adult life where I haven't known those numbers, but now I do know those numbers and it is quite useful. Because what that's allowed me to do, and this again, it's a system I've kind of worked towards over the years, but certainly got a lot better at over the last few years since we restructured our company to move away from being a sole trader to being a limited company. And we're kind of forced down this route as a limited company. But I now pay myself a salary from my content income that is the same amount every month and comes on the same day every month, and means that at least the baseline personal stuff is covered and catered for. Because although the company, the business, it has very erratic income and very erratic expenses, us personally, we know the last day of the month, we're going to get X amount of money transferred from our business account to our personal account. And that money, we also know, is enough to cover those monthly baseline expenses. So we make sure that before we do anything else, we pay ourselves the amount that we need to pay our minimum level of expenses. And it sounds so basic and simple. And for so many years, we didn't do it. For my first 5 years as a self-employed person, it just kind of all went into one big pot. And it was a chaotic mess that we only managed to avoid financial ruin from, because that was during our growth stage as a business. So we will always have increasing income to cover the mistakes that we'd made previously. So when we got things like big unexpected tax bills, they were always from like the year before. So we had the money to cover them and didn't get ourselves into a pickle. But it was purely through luck rather than judgment, because it wasn't being managed in any kind of way, unlike how it is now. And what that means is once I've paid myself and made sure that I've paid towards my investments and paid towards my pension and paid towards our personal accounts, I know that what's left over in the business, theoretically, I don't need to keep as tight a control on, because as long as there's enough in there to pay the team and to pay the business expenses, of which there are quite a few, and as long as we've got enough at the end of the year to pay the tax bill, any that's left over in there can be used for stuff like buying new gear, paying for travel, going for conventions, buying Lego, all of these things. I mean, because of the way we've get everything set up and structured, they're all business expenses. They all come out of kind of the business side of things. There's very little spending that we actually do that is personal spending, because almost everything that we spend money on is ultimately aimed towards creating content off the back of. But again, keeping those two things separate was always a challenge until we made them completely separate locations. Another thing that I've made a TikTok about previously that's been really useful, we bank with Starling. Please don't hack my bank account. Hopefully I've not given you enough information to do that. But the reason I bring that up is because Starling have, I think they call it spaces, where you don't have to have loads of different accounts with them. You can set up like envelopes or buckets or whatever you want to call them within your one account that you can then put money in, and it stops you being able to access from the other area. So I have my current account, but within my current account, there'll be the amount that's set aside for bills, the amount that's set aside for savings, the amount that's set aside for petrol, the amount that's set aside for food. And there'll be all these different pots. So when I get my money sent over from the company once a month, it then also gets split up into different areas within the current account. So at a glance, without having to do any calculation, I can have a look at my food. I think I call it housekeeping because I'm a 1960s mum. But I can look at my housekeeping pot, my housekeeping space, and know how much money we've got for food just at a glance. And that's quite useful to know as well. And then we've also got our savings space within that Starling account that uses something called Auto Roundup, which massively takes the stress out of savings. I don't have to think about it. Anytime I spend any money on that account, I automatically also make a deposit into the savings account of 10 times the difference between whatever I've spent and the nearest pound. So as an example, if I spend 50p on my bank card, £5 gets transferred into my savings account because it's taken the 50p that was left to round it up to £1, 10x'd it, stuck it in my savings. That builds up quite quickly. And once it's built up, to enough for me to notice that it's there, I just move it as a bulk over into my ISA, which is in a completely different financial institution. And once it's there, I don't see it, I forget it exists, and we're all good. And I think I've seen this described online as pay yourself first. And that's very much what we've got ourselves into doing. We make sure we've got the money set aside for the bills. We make sure that at the start of the month, not the end of the month, we're putting money into our investments and pension, because if you do it at the end of the month, you might not have any left over. And that way we know whatever is left over is the spending money. And that does make it a lot easier to not go way over our budget, which we would do in the past quite a lot. But I do also have some further rules. As an autistic man, rules are my bread and butter. I love a rule. If everything was rules, life would be so much easier. It's the shades of grey that I struggle with. But some rules that I use that I think are a big help, one that I've only started doing in the last year or so, is the wait 24 hours before buying rule. And this is so much more powerful than it sounds. My Amazon basket, my Lego basket, wherever else I spend money from, my baskets in all these places almost always have something in them. Because when I want something, I don't just go and buy it straight away. I go and add it to my basket, and then I'm not allowed to check out for at least 24 hours. And sometimes I'll go back to my basket to add something, realise the thing from the last time I did this is still in there from a week ago, and I'm like, well, turns out I didn't really want or need that after all. That can come out. The new thing that I want can go into the basket, and then the 24-hour timer starts again. But I'm not I'm not reminding myself when the 24 hours was up. So it just gives me 24 hours of thinking space, of breathing space to be like, do I really want it? Because if I'm going back on there the next day being like, yeah, I still really want that, I'll buy it then, because I know it is something that I really want. But this has saved me so much money on things that would have been impulse buys that actually turns out I didn't really need to get. Some examples recently, yet another backpack. I have a lot of backpacks. I love backpacks. I don't know what it is. I've always loved them, even as a kid. I had a £100 backpack sat in my Amazon basket. I don't need a £100 backpack. I already have several, and I didn't buy it. And I'm very proud of myself for not buying it. I've done it with loads of Lego sets over the last year or so. And then even really bonkers stuff. Like I forget what it's called. It was like the UK equivalent of pepper spray, because when I was falling down one of my prepping rabbit holes, I was like, I could get some of that. I need some of that. Added it to my basket, came back to the next day, and I was like, no, I don't need pepper spray. Just took it out, didn't buy it. But a year ago or 2 years ago, before the 24-hour rule, I'd now be the proud owner of a couple of cans of pepper spray with no idea what to do with them. This is how I ended up with 2 storage units full of junk, boys and girls. And I covered it briefly before, but only allowing my big spending to take place after the essentials are covered. That's something that wasn't a rule when everything was in one big pot, but it now is a rule, because obviously we have to pay ourselves on our payday. So that gets paid first before discretionary spending. That's a big changer. And then also I do try and keep track of stuff. I'm never going to be able to track every penny. It's just not how my brain works. But I do track my categories. My bank categorizes everything for me, which is super helpful, especially when it comes to tax season. It means I've got less details, less friction, takes less time, and just gives me a rough ballpark to work with. So I can be like, okay, we've spent £3,000 on Lego in the last couple of months. Maybe slow down on that a little bit. That's a thing that I noticed recently. Whereas if I'd have just been tracking every individual Lego set as it came in, I might not have actually seen the number was as big as it was. And I try and do that check-in once a week. I know daily would be even better, but I sometimes struggle to do it weekly. So it's all about, again, done is better than perfect. Find a system that works-ish, and that's better than a system that would work perfectly if you did it and then not doing it. So I would say 3 out of 4 times I'm checking it weekly. So about 3 times a month probably. And that's a lot more than I used to. And it definitely helps. And I am by no means perfect with all of this. I am still a nightmare when it comes to day-to-day money stuff. Back in my 20s, we got ourselves into a huge amount of debt because of this. And thankfully, my income has been able to outpace my spending over the last 10 years. But I am still a nightmare. And if I didn't know it and didn't try and keep myself under control, we could get ourselves into all manner of problems. And we do still sometimes have things that aren't ideal, that are a bit of a struggle. Unexpected costs. I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, we've had to buy a new camera for £500 that we hadn't budgeted for. We've had to buy a new fan for, I don't even know how much. Anna's dealing with that you know, we hadn't budgeted for. When we went to Amsterdam a few years ago, and ended up, through no fault of our own, missing our connecting train to get home. The first one was delayed, so we missed the second one. We ended up stuck in Brussels overnight. So we had to pay for a hotel in Brussels. We had to pay for a new Eurostar ticket. We then got stuck in London because it was during a heat wave and there was no trains back home from London. So we had another night in a hotel in London, and we ended up at like £1,000 down off the back of that trip, completely unexpected. And we will sometimes get stuff that just goes wrong. And it can be quite challenging to the overall budgets when you're just, because of the nature of what we do. If my camera breaks, I do have to buy a new one. If my PC breaks, I do have to buy a new one because I need them for my job. And my job has some very expensive tools attached to it. And one of the biggest things that I've had to learn over the last 10 years is how it's a business expense isn't justification for just buying whatever I want whenever I want. Because, yeah, I've already mentioned a lot of the stuff that I buy is a business expense, but that doesn't make it free. And it's definitely a mindset. I think there's a scene in Schitt's Creek where they have a whole back and forth about it's a write-off. And it's very easy to fall into that mindset as a self-employed person. And I think sometimes you even get it from viewers on TikTok, on YouTube, who are like, yeah, but it's a write-off. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you know, I still have to buy something if it's a write-off. I did a big video about how much the Lego City has cost us so far this year over on the Lego channel a couple of days ago. And one of the comments on that was, yeah, but it is all it is all a write-off. You've spent $8,000, but it's a write-off. Yeah. But I have still spent $8,000. You know, it being a write-off doesn't mean I didn't spend the money. So I still had to have the money to be able to spend it, to have it then be written off against my income. So I end up paying a little bit less tax. But business expense doesn't mean free. The business is a real thing. And it took me longer than it should have done to track that side of things, as well as I've maybe tracked my personal stuff from time to time. And again, that's been hit and miss over the years as well. But teaching myself that business expense doesn't mean free, even though intellectually I knew it, emotionally I definitely didn't. And that has been something that I'm working on, I'm getting better at, but is still a bit of a weak point. And I think that kind of sums up the message I want to put out to you as part of the video, because we're not looking for perfection here. I don't think you should be looking for perfection either. We're looking for consistency and ongoing upward trend improvement. We're never going to be perfect, but if we're a little bit better now than we were a year ago or 2 years ago, then that's progress. And if we're doing it more consistent than we used to, that's progress. My brain is never going to let me be completely on top of it. I'm never going to be one of these super frugal people who does no spend years and invests 90% of their income into their pension or into their ISA so that they can do the whole financial independence, retire early thing. I see it all on Reddit. I'm very jealous. I could never do it because my brain needs to spend. I'm a spender, not a saver. I have to trick myself into saving, and I've found ways to do it. But I am comfortable with the fact that I'm not looking for perfection. I am looking for improvement and consistency, and I think we are delivering it. And that's a good thing for you to aim for too. Let me know down in the comments if you want a breakdown of the actual tools, templates, spreadsheets that I use. I'm happy to do a follow-up video on that kind of thing, but I'm going to need a lot of you to ask, because I think for the majority of people, that's quite dry and quite boring. So unless we get an overwhelming demand for it, I probably won't do it, but let me know if you want to see it, because I am happy to do it, because once I get down a rabbit hole on something, I can talk about it. That's for sure. But if you have enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a nice big thumbs up on there for me. Subscribe to the channel for loads more stuff just like this, including I think it's going to be a divisive video on Friday, and I'm going to try and pitch it so it doesn't get too divisive. But you might want to check back in on Friday, because some of you are going to call me a crazy person. And thank you very much for watching.